Well, we have a guest speaker tonight. We have Sharon Levine, and we're so excited to have you. So, welcome to the State Public Affairs Committee of the Junior Leagues of New Jersey. We represent the 8 junior leagues of New Jersey. Our State Public Affairs Committee. We work on behalf of women and children across the state, and we work with organizations and like yourselves, as well as legislators. And so I'm Victoria Williams, and I'm chair of the committee. And I will now turn it over to Cheryl Bear, our vice chair, to read your bio and formally introduce you.
Thank you, Sharon, for doing this. So Sharon Levine is a seasoned government affairs and communications leader with extensive experience shaping public policy and advancing the rights of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in New Jersey. She is known for her strategic insight, strong legislative relationships, and ability to communicate complex issues with clarity and impact. As the Senior Director of Governmental Affairs and Communications at the ARC of New Jersey, Sharon leads statewide advocacy on behalf of 100,000 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in New Jersey and their families. Her work has contributed to major policy achievements, including expanded supported employment eligibility, protections against restraint and seclusion in schools, and improved pediatric network adequacy standards. She also directs annual state budget campaigns that have secured critical funding increases. Sharon serves as the organization's primary representative at the State House, monitoring and regulating and regularly testifying before legislative committees. She maintains strong relationships with lawmakers, state agencies, and coalition partners. Prior to the ARC of New Jersey, Sharon worked as a public information officer at the Department of Banking and Insurance and as a legislative director for a now retired state senator. So thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much for being willing to do this, and we hope to learn from you.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Victoria and Cheryl, for having me here. The junior leagues, you guys do such incredible work, and it's an honor to spend the part of the evening with you. So thank you. I am gonna, if it's okay, I'll just go right into opening up my PowerPoint and sharing.
Yes, please. We
Okay,
are excited to see all of the good work that you do.
wonderful. So I'm gonna hopefully not mess this up. I'm gonna hit share. I'm gonna do this. Uh, let's see if I can, yep. Right. Okay, can everybody see my screen and everything looks good? Hears me fine? Thumbs
Yeah.
up? Yes,
Yep.
okay, good. Just making sure. All right, so again, thank you for having me. This is a real treat for me. I really admire the work that you all do, and I'm really hoping to have a dialogue with everyone. So obviously, I'll present my slides, but I really hope that I can be a resource tonight, but then also feel free to call on me in the future as you guys lead your policy work on behalf of women and children. Uh, I am going to hit the next slide. So my presentation, Strengthening Community Through Advocacy and How Every Voice Shapes Policy. Let's see if I can just real fast. Sorry, I am missing. Oh,
If you want to advance, I think you might be able to the space bar.
there it goes. I found it now. I apologize for that. Using a different computer than I normally do. All right. So to start, I want to give everyone just a brief overview about the ARC of New Jersey. We are the state's largest advocacy organization representing people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. And then we have 20 local county chapters of the ARC, and they're the ones that do all of our hands-on services, running group homes and day programs, respite care, vocational training, anything that a person with intellectual and developmental disabilities may need in order to live a successful and integrated life in the community. At the ARC of New Jersey, we really handle the advocacy ends of things. So as Cheryl mentioned, I work with our state lawmakers, members of the governor's administration, representatives of New Jersey's congressional delegation to advance public policy that's inclusive of the needs of people with developmental disabilities. And then we have a host of programs at the agency that really work closely with individuals and families to help them navigate the service delivery system, which can be very complicated. And there are so many federal entitlement programs and different access points, and we have thousands of families reach out to us a year looking for information and referral and looking for advocacy on behalf of their loved one. So later at the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about ways that we can hopefully, help if you need that kind of help or spread resources. But primarily, we don't do a ton of services at the state agency. We really work closely with families and to hold their hand through a lot of challenges that they may face and getting them the resources that they need. Let's see. So my philosophy on advocacy is that I'm really here to serve as a megaphone to amplify the voices of those I represent. Nobody wants to hear from me. They want to hear from the individuals with lived experiences and family members. And there's really nothing more important than sharing your story. I really want to be the bridge that connects our grassroots to policymakers, and I want to support families on their advocacy journey. It's also critical in my work that the work that I do really be rooted in the lived experiences of those I'm representing. So whether it's the boots on the ground challenges that I know our chapters face on a daily basis, or obstacles that families and individuals with disabilities are dealing with, those stories are what motivate me, but they're also rooted in good public policy and help move the ball forward on things that we care about. So let's hit the ground running and talk about tips for talking with lawmakers and how best to connect with them. I worked for a state senator in Monmouth County at the start of my career, and we would oftentimes host meeting days where constituents and advocacy groups and lobbyists would come in and discuss a wide range of issues. Those meetings at the district office would look very different than the meetings at the State House. So it's important for you to keep in mind that your strategy for speaking with elected officials is really going to vary based on where and when the meeting happens. So for instance, if you are meeting with a lawmaker at his or her district office, typically you're given about 30 minutes to discuss the topic. This means you'll have the opportunity to kind of delve more deeply into the issue, give examples, offer a richer, more nuanced overview, both for the elected official as well as, any staff that may attend. This is also a chance to bring a bigger group, right? So the district office can usually accommodate more people, and each person in the meeting has the ability to share their story and kind of their perspective and have a different role in the meeting, what they're responsible for sharing. I think that even though this setting has more breathing room, it's really important that you try to keep your messaging concise, and have a game plan going in and have talking points. And you always want to try, if possible, to connect the material to the legislator's district, to the people that he or she represents. In addition to a relevant overview, you really want to make sure that you end the meeting with what comes next and how the lawmaker can help. Because in most instances, the lawmaker wants to help and they want to take action. They want to be able to do something to advance the cause that you've come in to talk about. So it's really important that you don't leave them hanging about how you want them to proceed, and make sure that you have a firm ask, and you talk with them about what that is. And that ask can look different depending on what issue you're there to talk about, right? So it could be that you want that lawmaker to sign on as a co-sponsor for a bill, or to sponsor a new piece of legislation that doesn't already exist. You may want them to carry the water for you and reach out to the chairperson of a committee and ask that a bill be posted for a vote, or maybe connect you with the Senate president or the Assembly speaker, and advocate for your piece of legislation at that level. And the other thing I want to note is that it's okay if you don't know what the ask is, right? Maybe you're coming to them for advice and counsel. As lawmakers, they tend to have a different perspective perspective than we do as advocates. And so they might have insights or strategy tips or things that we might not have thought about. So not having an ask can sometimes be the ask. Having the lawmaker sort of work with you and figure out, how can I advance this? What do you think would be the next best step? And then collaborate with him or her on how to make that happen. So next I'll talk about advocacy at the State House. Like I said, this is going to be very different to the experience you might have when talking to a legislator in their district office. One of the events that I've hosted for several years in a row was the Disability Awareness Month event held in Goldfinch Square. And there's a couple photos here that show it. Goldfinch Square is named after the state bird, and it's located in the corridor in the basement of the State House. That might not sound like a very fun place to hang out, but it's actually really prime real estate. It connects the State House to the State House Annex. And while it might not sound fancy, it's actually has an incredibly high volume of foot traffic. And so as lawmakers and staff head to their committee rooms or to their caucus meetings, they must walk by your group. So it's really a perfect opportunity to pull them aside, grab their ear, talk with them briefly on an issue, pose for photos. Here's a picture of the previous Department of Human Services commissioner with a proclamation from the governor declaring March is Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month in a very public space. Lots of people, a number of self-advocates were there, and this was a great event with a lot of high visibility. So this is obviously going to be a different experience for you than a district office meeting. In this instance, when lawmakers are kind of passing through in the State House, it's really important that you be concise with your messaging. Make sure you have a couple of pre-planned talking points and be on the lookout for the legislators that you are maybe more specifically hoping to see. If you are thinking of maybe planning or hosting a day at Goldfinch Square, make sure that you have to reserve that space ahead of time. And you can invite lawmakers. Obviously, you'll see a bunch of people no matter what, even if you don't invite anyone, but you can reach out to lawmakers in the weeks leading up to the event and tell them you're going to have a table and you'd love to see them come down and speak with them. It's a great place to have resources and materials. It's not a great place to go line by line in a bill and talk about on the line 15. I really think we should amend this wording. That's not the type of conversation you're going to have in a Goldfinch Square kind of meeting. It's got to be quick and concise, but it is a good place to start a conversation, get something on the radar of a lawmaker, and then hopefully follow up with them and continue that dialogue with them, either in the district office or with staff at another time. So that's important to keep in mind. The other thing about advocacy at the State House as opposed to the district office is if you have a one-on-one meeting with a lawmaker, you should go into it knowing that you may have less time than you do in a district office meeting. Lawmakers at the State House are typically there on committee days, and they don't have control over how long those committee meetings will last. So it's important to be flexible because they do have other commitments, and those commitments can be unpredictable and can impact the timing of your meeting, both in terms of when it starts and how long you will have to actually meet. You can have a small group with you in Trenton. Certainly you can still bring people like you would to the district office, but you should keep in mind that legislative offices at the State House are going to be smaller. And sometimes meetings are held in spaces that are maybe less private than a district office meeting. So lots of people kind of coming and going, and it may be hard to have sort of a more intense policy conversation at the State House than it would be back in the home district area. So a third way of connecting with lawmakers is by testifying at a committee hearing. But before I get into testimony, I wanted to touch a bit about committee structure. Each committee is made up of both Republicans and Democrats, but not in an even number. And that's because Democrats have control in both houses, both in the Senate and the Assembly. And so you'll see more representation from Democrats on those committees. Oftentimes, the Speaker and the Senate President will assign lawmakers to specific committees based on their interest areas, where they reside geographically. Like if you're in one of the more rural areas, you might be assigned to an agriculture committee if that matches what your home district looks like. And it may be you may get assigned to a committee based on your profession. So, for example, now Congressman Herb Conaway was the longtime chair of the Assembly Health Committee, and he was also a doctor by trade. So he had a lot of knowledge from his professional work about healthcare and about some of the obstacles that New Jersey citizens would face. So that made a lot of sense when he was an Assembly member. So bills are heard in committee before they move on to the full Senate and Assembly. And if the bill also requires the state to spend money, it's also going to need to be heard by the Senate Budget and Assembly Budget Committees, or Assembly Appropriations Committee, I should say. And that's when the bill will get a fiscal note, which is sort of an estimate of how much they anticipate the bill would cost. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint that number exactly. But they try to give a rough estimate for lawmakers before they vote on a bill to give them an understanding of what this will cost in terms of state dollars. In the work that I do, you can find me most frequently in the Assembly Human Services and the Senate Health, Human Services, and Senior Citizens Committee, because that is where a lot of disability legislation gets referred to. And in my role, it's really important that I develop strong relationships with the chairs of those committees, and that would be Chairman Vitale and Chairwoman Spate and the Assembly side. The relationships are really important because when relevant legislation gets posted in committee and I get up there and testify, I want both the chairs and the committee members to recognize me and to look at me as a social an expert, a policy expert on these matters. And so they take what I say seriously because they know that I come at it with a lot of informed stories from families and from self-advocates and from the work that I do each day. So building those relationships before a bill gets heard in committee is really a critical piece. But very often the ARC of New Jersey's advocacy extends beyond human services. For example, we track a lot of special education bills having to do with services and supports in the school system. And those, of course, would be referred to the Assembly Education or Senate Education committees. We have things like Access Link, which is a key mode of transportation for people with disabilities, many of whom do not drive and rely on public transportation or caregivers. And so those bills would go to, let's say, the Assembly Transportation Committee. And then, access to healthcare for people with disabilities is a huge hurdle. Not enough doctors are willing to take Medicaid, which is the primary insurance for those that I represent. And so those would go to the Health Committee. And so an important part of the advocacy work that I do is really building strong relationships on both sides of the aisle and in varied committees throughout the State House. So how do you get a bill to be posted? So let's say you've met with the senator or the assembly person, you've had a really great successful meeting, and now a bill has been introduced. That's a great start, of course. Now, how do we get that bill posted in a committee agenda for an initial vote? And so one strategy for getting a bill posted is to get a large number of co-sponsors to sign on to that bill, because it really shows leadership that there's strong support behind the legislation. So you have your primary sponsors, but then you can have, an infinite number of co-sponsors, and really meeting with other lawmakers and telling them about the bill and getting them to sign on is really an important part of the process. If you can make these sponsors bipartisan, I think that's always helpful because it shows that your issue transcends politics. It's just a good, piece of legislation that's going to help people. And so that's really something that can be helpful as well. The ARC of New Jersey, I served on a coalition a number of years back on a bill that would require the state to look at annual rate increases for both disability services, but also mental health services. And one of our main objectives was to get as many co-sponsors as possible to help convince, the Speaker of the Assembly that this was a really important piece of legislation and to post it in committee for a vote. And so that was one of the strategies we used to help, get that moving forward. Another step in the process that I would recommend is reaching out to the chairman or the chairwoman of the committee with a letter or via, email, pick up the phone, and having a conversation with them or with staff to request that the legislation get posted. And this is a good opportunity to talk about why the bill matters, and, why you really want to see it moving forward. It's also a good idea to have similar conversations with the Speaker's office, with the Senate President's office, and even, the majority office staffs. I would say then never, ever underestimate the importance and the value of staffers. They are so critical in getting work done, and they are true, critical assets in the process. And if there's ever a time where you request to meet with the lawmaker and he or she can't meet with you and you end up meeting with the chief of staff or the legislative director, that's a victory. That's, that person is not just a cog in the machine. They play a critical role. So certainly involve and loop in the staffers on anything that you're working on. So now that we've talked a little bit about the committee structure, I thought we could dive into testifying. This can really be a bit of a daunting experience. I know it was for me, especially if you've never done it before. It can be intimidating. And I think the key to really delivering successful testimony, in addition to showing up early and getting a parking spot in the State House garage, which is no easy feat, is to illustrate for lawmakers why an issue is important. The other key is to use the experience to educate the committee members who are not going to be typically subject matter experts on the topic that you're either promoting or opposing, and to really use the testimony as a chance to talk about the why. So why does this matter to people in New Jersey? And I think bonus points to anyone who can really link the issue to the specific communities that are being served by the lawmakers on the committee. So for example, if you're testifying before the Budget Committee and you can connect the topic of the bill to Bergen County, where Chairman Paul Sarlo represents and lives, he's going to really take an interest in what you're saying and be very invested in what you're saying. And sometimes you can't do that, right? So I represent statewide issues, and sometimes they just impact everyone. But sometimes if you have a more local issue, or you can cite an example of something that's statewide but has a local impact, that can be really helpful. The other thing that I always like to tell people when families come down to the State House to keep in mind is that you should always build in a lot of time to wait. The committee may be hearing 20 bills that day, and you have no way of knowing if you're going to be the first bill or the last bill, or how much time they're going to allot for each speaker. And so it's really good to just be flexible and understanding that the government process can take a long time. And you should just accommodate for that in your schedule when you head down there. You should also expect that when you get up there, you cannot speak endlessly. You can, obviously write a very long, detailed testimony to be submitted, but you should really try to speak from your heart, use talking points, and understand that the chairperson may limit you to, let's say, 3 or 5 minutes, especially if there are many stakeholders down in Trenton that day looking to talk. They do tend to limit how much time each speaker gets. And that's why, like I said, it's really great. You want to get into more detail, definitely do so, but do so in the written remarks, so that you don't get cut off in the middle of your oral testimony. And then always make sure that you're thanking the committee and answering any questions that they may have. And hopefully they do have questions, because that means that they were very engaged and interested in what you had to say. So in terms of logistics, I'm really a preparation person. And so the thing I like to do ahead of testifying is really think about what might a lawmaker ask me about this issue, and what those questions might be and how I would answer them. And I find that that's really great prep ahead of going down to Trenton, is to think about, okay, if I knew nothing about this topic and I was listening to the testimony, what might be something I would ask myself, and then figure out what would be the best way of answering that. So that's a tip I like to give people so that they don't get thrown off if the legislator starts asking them questions. We talked about arriving early, building in time to wait, filling out a slip. There's a picture of one there. If you're associated with an organization, you can certainly put that down, but you don't have to be. You can just be a citizen of New Jersey coming to speak. Make sure you have enough copies of your testimony, not just for lawmakers, but also for staff. And always keep in mind that your written testimony is part of the public record and it can be accessed by anyone who requests it. So sometimes I will want more information on a topic and I call up the Office of Legislative Services and I say, can I have copies of everybody's testimony from February 1st? And that's part of the public record. They will send you everyone's remarks. So just keep that in mind, that anything that you submit is officially part of the state record. When you're giving your testimony, you want to make sure that you're identifying the bill by the name. Sometimes it has a name, but definitely by the number. So the Senate number and the matching assembly number, and that you reference that both in your written remarks, but also in your oral testimony. And I'll note a little bit. So this is kind of the process for, the in-person hearings during COVID. And still today, there are some opportunities sometimes, whether it be with the legislature or in other advocacy opportunities where you're doing it virtual. And I think that is still a good method. I can tell you for, self-advocates, though that's individuals with developmental disabilities, they really struggle with transportation. And so getting down to the State House for them can be hard, and it precludes them from participating in the legislative process. And so virtual hearings can be helpful for people who may, have challenges with transportation or geographically or very far away. I think you lose a little bit of something. I think sometimes in-person testimony, you can sort of have follow-up conversations in the room sometimes, and you lose that a bit with virtual. But I wouldn't stand on principle and say I'm never going to testify virtually, because it does offer other people who may have challenges and wouldn't ordinarily be able to make their voice heard, suddenly be able to be a part of the process. So they both have value, and I would encourage you to try to do both. So next up, we can delve a little bit into budget advocacy. In my role, I oversee 10-month budget advocacy campaigns aimed at, really increasing some key appropriations that impact people with developmental disabilities in the fiscal year state budget. Initial advocacy really begins in the fall, and it starts with the governor and departmental budget hearings, and then really switches over to the legislature in March after the budget address. The budget testimony experience is going to be a little bit different than delivering legislative testimony for a number of reasons. The timeline when you're delivering budget testimony is usually 3 minutes, and that's because of how many people attend and request to speak. So it's really tough to get into the nuance of a funding request or an appropriation line at the budget hearings. There's just so many people there, and you really can't fit in, complicated in the weeds conversations. Also at budget testimony, lawmakers are less likely to ask you questions in response to your testimony. And that's again, because they just have too many people there. They're listening and they're taking in your testimony. And occasionally they might ask you for clarification or have a question or two. But for the most part, they're working very hard to make sure everyone has the chance to speak. And typically budget runs from all day long. So it is a very long experience. Testifying at the budget committees is a really important chance to lay out your advocacy with lawmakers. It's a quick overview of an issue and why it matters. And that leads you to have later conversations, more in-depth, one-on-one with members of both the Senate and Assembly budget committees. And that's what we do at the ARC. We make sure we're at the hearings. We get on record with what we're asking for, but then we do a ton of follow-up one-on-one to really kind of get into more of that nitty-gritty. So make sure that when you're testifying that you're keeping your messaging sort of the same. If you said it at the assembly, you don't want to change it and say something different at the assembly and then something else when you're meeting one-on-one. It's really important to be concise and consistent. That way lawmakers know what you need and why. I find at the ARC of New Jersey, we try to do, having a campaign or a slogan. It's helpful for branding purposes and it makes you stand out a bit because, as I said, so many people request additional money in the budget. It is hard to kind of make yourself unique in that setting. I think that when you have a campaign or a slogan, lawmakers can help identify you with the request and it kind of sticks in their mind a little more because they're being flooded. It's really important that your messaging be both understandable but also, memorable. One of the priority budget items this year that I'm working on is to move more people off the state waiting list. Individuals with disabilities wait about 10 years before they can access more of the comprehensive services through a Medicaid waiver. And this has been a 3-year campaign, right? And you don't always meet with success in year 1. That's also really important. But we're now in year 3, and I haven't gotten everything that I've wanted, but we have made some progress, which is really encouraging. And I think that's important to know that a campaign for the budget takes time. It takes a lot of foundation work, and you need to build upon, both education and awareness on that to achieve success. So I want to just share a couple of stories that I think might be helpful, especially since I know women and children are certainly a priority for the junior leagues. The first story is about children with intellectual and developmental disabilities who need respite service. And respite is a caregiver break, especially for families supporting and caring for children who have complex intellectual and developmental disabilities, sometimes behavioral challenges. It's very difficult for those caregivers to be on all the time, working, caregiving, and families can crumble without respite. So knowing that this is a real challenge, I met with the chair. It used to be the Women's and Children Committee, and it always messes me up what the new title is, but it's food, children, and food insecurity. But it's Chairwoman Hayter. And I had a district office meeting with her, and I brought with me representatives from the ARC of Bergen and Passaic counties because that is the district that she represents. And we had a long conversation about respite and why it's so important, but also a lot about why it's so hard to access and what we can do to make that system better. So right now, if you're a family, you have to choose and there are different types of respite. You can have a worker come into your home. You can drop your child off at a facility or center-based respite program. There's lots of different options. But right now, the state mandates that if you pick one of those options, you have to stick with it for 90 days. So if on Monday you need one thing and on Tuesday you need something else and Wednesday you need a third thing, it doesn't matter. You've picked your path and you're stuck with it. So we worked with the assemblywoman to try to make those rules less rigid and talked about the ways in which the system isn't really flexible enough to meet the needs of families who are caring for children with disabilities. And so this was a really productive meeting. The assemblywoman really agreed that changes were necessary. I had lived experience with me with the individuals I brought. And then I was able to work really closely with her staff on drafting a bill. And it wasn't a quick experience. It went through several revisions because we wanted to make sure that we got it right. But ultimately, we did come up with a piece of legislation that would really be very meaningful in terms of shifting policy at the Department of Children and Families. And so once we had the finalized bill, the chairwoman posted it in her committee, and I had the honor of testifying in support of it. And then it was a second reference to Assembly Human Services, and I again was able to, I requested from the chairwoman of that committee, Chairwoman Spate, that it get posted. It was, and I was able to testify in support of it again, and it had unanimous support there. Unfortunately, we were not able to get it over the finish line in the previous legislative session, but I am hopeful that it does move forward in this new legislative session. But I bring that up because it's a really good example of how there was an issue. We went to educate a lawmaker about it. We brought people from the district who were impacted by it. We worked on the legislation to help fix the problem. We said we need legislation to fix this, and we worked with her and our team to make that happen. We got the bill on a committee agenda. It was voted out. Not every story unfortunately ends in a perfect ending, but the fight isn't over. And I think that's a really good example of how you kind of take something that's a problem and work towards a solution. And the other really great part of that story is that we needed the chairwoman on another issue, and because of the relationship that I had built with her and her staff during this DCF conversation, she was able to really come through for us. So children with intellectual and developmental disabilities can need camp services in the summer when school is out. And camp is a really important thing, especially for working parents, because those parents can't tap into the traditional day camp services that non-disabled peers are able to access. And so the problem is that the camp rate in New Jersey hasn't gone up in more than a decade. So while inflation has gone up and minimum wage has gone up and costs have gone up, camp rates have stayed flat. And so it's become really harder and harder for camp providers to continue this critical service that families really depend on. And as I always like to say, all children deserve to go to camp, whether they are disabled or not. And so we were really working very hard. I led a campaign to increase the camp rate. And after months and months of advocacy, we were successful. I can say we were very successful in doing so. And the chairwoman, Assemblywoman Hayter, she was really critical in making that happen. And I don't think we would have been as successful if I hadn't had that initial meeting with her to talk about the DCF challenges around respite. And she really came through for us. And we were able to raise the camp rate by $45 a day, which is huge. It was the first increase that had gotten in 10 years. And it really made a difference, right, to make the service reliable for families who care about it. So even though the bill that we were trying to advance didn't ultimately get signed into law, there was another silver lining of that, and that is we developed a champion on this other really important issue. And so I think that's also important for advocates to keep in mind. Your path is sometimes windy, but it can still be successful. So just talking a little bit about what's ahead for the remainder of the fiscal year, which ends June 30th. A lot of the time moving forward from now is going to be focused on budget. I've heard reports, as I'm sure many of you had, that it's going to be a tough budget year. But I always say if we didn't advocate in the years that we were told it would be tough, then we would never be advocating and we would never be getting the money that we need for the people that we represent. So this year, the budget address is going to be a little bit later than normal. Typically, it's at the end of February, but because the governor and the administration are new, the address gets pushed back this year to March 10th to give them a little bit more time to really evaluate the state's current fiscal situation and put together a budget proposal for fiscal year 27. After the budget address, the Senate and the Assembly budget committees get to work and they hold public hearings that anyone can go and speak at. And I referenced those earlier. And then later in the spring, the commissioners will come before the committees and talk about departmental spending, priorities for their departments, and how they plan to spend state dollars. Negotiations on the budget kind of continue throughout the spring, and then we all hope that a final budget document is approved and signed into law before the June 30th deadline, so that none of us have to miss, celebrating the July 4th holiday. So hopefully we don't end up with a state shutdown. That is not something that happens frequently, and hopefully, the legislature and the governor can come to terms on a funding plan. So one thing I also wanted to talk about, which I think is an important part of advocacy, is voting. Every year, I put together a voting guide. We are a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse candidates. We don't have a PAC. We don't make donations to campaigns or participate in political activity, but I do put out an annual Get Out the Vote guide, which just encourages people to vote because it is such a critical way of making your voice heard. And in the guide, there's a lot of good information about how to vote. There are so many different ways. New Jersey is very has given people a lot of access to voting that other states haven't. There's early voting, there's mail-in voting, there's ballot boxes, drop-off boxes in your county, and so it's really an educational guide. And the other thing it includes is a candidate questionnaire. So we reach out to, in this past election, Jack Citarelli and now Governor Mikey Sherrill, and we ask them identical questions about disability issues. And I always make sure I tell people that I print their responses exactly the way they send them. I don't shorten them, I don't edit them. I want people to hear directly from them. And then we just give people the information and let them know that this is an opportunity for them to advocate. Voting is a method of advocating, and they shouldn't let that opportunity pass them by. We also include a piece, a short essay by a family member or a individual with a disability to talk about voting, again, nonpartisan, and why that matters so much. So I would encourage you to also, incorporate that voting perspective, in the work that you do, because we always say your vote is your voice. And it is a mistake not to use that voice in November. So to kind of finish up a little bit, people always ask me, how can we support the ARC of New Jersey's advocacy work? And really, two of the best ways is to really stay in close connection with us. We have an action alert system, and that really allows you to add your voice to our grassroots network, and to help. Your voice helps to reinforce the work that we're doing on priority issue areas. We ask individuals throughout the year to weigh in with the governor, very often with the budget chairs. Sometimes if there's a piece of legislation that's of critical importance, we'll ask people to weigh in with lawmakers on that. And so signing up for our action alerts is a very easy way for you to send messages to the lawmakers that we care about and help move policy forward. The other item is signing up for our newsletter, and you can join our mailing list, and the link is on there. And that's a great way to learn more about our organization. And we're always looking for families and individuals and anyone who's looking to be supportive to come with us to Trenton, to share their story, to be willing to be an example of why public policy impacts our community and why it matters so much. So definitely consider that, and we would love to have you be a part of our grassroots. And then finally, I just want to share some resources. The ARC of New Jersey Family Institute has a public policy advocacy go bag, which is basically a virtual hub of information for people who want some tips and tricks for sharing your personal story and interacting with your elected official. You don't have to have a personal connection to disability to find some of these resources helpful. Ooh, yep, sorry about that. Can you see? Sorry about that. I X'd out of my presentation by accident. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, you don't have to have a personal connection with disability to find these resources helpful. I just find that they're great sort of useful tools for people who are interested in getting more involved in policy. So I would encourage you to take a look at that as well. And then just finally, I will say that if you are a family member or if you have someone in your life who you think would benefit from our resources, I would really encourage you to have them reach out to me. We have full-time staff who are dedicated specifically to helping people navigate these complicated systems. There's no charge for it. It's just, we make sure that we help families understand these kind of complex webs that are out there. State services are wonderful, but they're not always easy to get and access. And so please feel free to share my contact information, share the ARC of New Jersey's information. I'm happy to be a resource and get people the help that they need. and happy to answer any questions about public policy or my work in Trenton.
Sharon, thank you so much. This was incredible, very comprehensive, very timely. I know I have a couple of questions. I don't want to hog the time, but and I want to give everyone else a chance. I just do want to mention how you pointed out that the Goldfinch Square is prime real estate. We every year we go to for our advocacy day to meet with legislators and other community organizers that are there. We have a resource table that's set up, and we're right there. One year we were in Goldfinch, but in the last couple of years we've been in the Annex Tunnel. And so that's another prime real estate. So we're super excited. We're planning to go on the 23rd. We were just
Oh,
talking about
great.
that just before you joined. And so we're looking forward to that. But I'd like to just give others an opportunity to ask some questions or to point out or to make any comments. Please, anyone.
Well, maybe I'll see you down in Trenton on the
Well,
23rd.
And you will be there.
thank you so much. It was awesome.
Oh, thank you. I hope it was helpful.
It was very helpful. I have a question. There was a time when there was a threshold, and I believe it was more official than it is today, under which if a bill has an appropriation, but it's a very small amount, and I believe it used to be like $1 million or below, that it would not have to go through appropriations. Have you seen bills like that? And do you have any insight as to what the prioritization of what would or wouldn't get it bounced into or out of the appropriations process if it was for a very small amount might be?
That's actually, so I haven't heard that before. That's interesting. It's something I would have to look up. As far as I know, if you're spending state dollars, then it has to go through that process because there needs to be, I guess, accountability, obviously, for how we're spending, tax money, but also it gives lawmakers an understanding of whether or not they should vote for it. Obviously, before they endorse something with a yes vote, they want to know what it's going to cost the state. So I hadn't heard that before, that there was a threshold, like a low threshold. I think most of the bills don't have low amounts tied to them. They tend to be in the millions of dollars. So I don't see that coming up often when I'm in Assembly Appropriations or Senate budget. Usually the price tags on the bills are typically higher. But that's definitely something I'm gonna have to research and look into because I hadn't heard that previously. I think you're on mute.
You're on mute, Claire.
Sometimes we look at things that might just have a tiny little administrative cost, but
Right.
don't have any real significant impact.
That's an excellent question, and it's definitely something I'm going to look into. Yeah, for sure. And even your locally elected official might know the answer to that too. But I'm going to look into that and see because that is a good way to kind of get a bill going faster, because if it doesn't have to make a stop in budget or appropriations, it can move through the legislative process a little more swiftly. So that's a great question.
Yeah, if it was just like a rule change or something, which might have a big economic impact, but doesn't actually have a cost.
Right. So with rule changes, those are through the departments, and they do have a section when they make a rule proposal change about economic impact. So that's absolutely the case, but those don't have to go through budget committee. And I think Sarah might have been weighing in. She might have more information on that.
I'd love to hear it.
Oh, yeah. So I just put in the comments. So I think, so there's the overall cost, which would be like a fiscal note, versus like an actual appropriation, which is the legislation, including money to be moved for a specific purpose. And Claire, that might be what you're thinking of, because I do know that if the fiscal
Mm.
note is indeterminate or low, they sometimes will bypass appropriations. But then if the bill says like this bill appropriates $500,000 for like respite care, let's say, that would go through appropriations then.
So would the fiscal note provision be put in by OLS? Who would
Yes. So,
who they would determine that?
yep.
Yes.
Okay, that answers, that's a big part of the question. You don't know what their criteria is for that one way or another.
In terms of like a minimum amount, I don't know what
Well,
that is.
or criteria, like that it can't, change, something. No, you don't know what it is that they're concerned about. Because we do in anti-trafficking sometimes we have things that are again, things that could have a big impact to survivors, but have no impact particularly to the state budget.
So my feeling is if it doesn't have a big impact on the state budget, then that's really what they're concerned about.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Claire, the example I would give you is like a bill that says we're appropriating $250,000 to the coalition or to the Human Trafficker Survivors Fund, right? That would go through appropriations, but then a bill that is like, we are going to, I don't know, provide rape kits to every single human trafficking survivor. That would have a fiscal note because maybe there's a cost associated with that bill, but it's not actually moving money around. So I think that would be like the gray area there for you.
Right. Well, or sometimes if we're asking a small amount of money to be allocated to the anti-trafficking commission, that the commission may need an additional appropriation for a small amount of something or another, to do something. Perhaps it might be a public information campaign for an event like the World Cup, and they're going to need 10 grand to do that or whatever. Sometimes we need to kind of do simple things like that. And it's still staying within the state. It's not like it's creating something, but sometimes you just have to find the money.
Yes, that is something I'm very
Like
familiar with. Just
a
have
little,
to find the money.
even if it's just like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Cheryl had some
Cheryl,
great questions.
you put some questions in the chat. Do you want to select which one you want to raise?
Well, I mean, based on what the committee thinks is the most helpful, because I know we don't have enough time. So I just put a couple options just to, so I guess I would say, well, we talked about timing a little bit. So I would say, how can organizations sustain momentum when the legislative process feels slow? And then just, I guess, briefly, if you could just say what common misunderstandings are about how bills move through a committee process before reaching a full vote.
Yeah, so the slow part is definitely frustrating, I think, for all of us, because we all want to see like that bill that I referenced with Assemblywoman Hayter, that was like months and months and months just to get because I was working with her staff was working with OLS. It would come back to me. Like there was a lot of revisions. Then we finally got it posted, which was a great victory. But yes, I mean, these things are slow and there are constantly hurdles. So I would say don't get discouraged by that. Just kind of you have to keep at it and you have to keep keeping the momentum going in terms of just constant contact with the lawmaker's office, letting them know that it's still something you're very interested in and very committed to. Like I said, kind of like whipping up support and sponsors and talking to other offices about it, not just the champion that you have, but really spreading that around, making sure there's broad awareness. And yes, the legislative process is always slower than we'd like, but you kind of have to be the workhorse and the engine that keeps that momentum going and doesn't let people forget, because it's so easy for lawmakers to be distracted by the next thing, right? The next issue that comes up, the next person that meets with them. And so you really have to be not nagging, but energized and making sure that it stays at the forefront as a priority. And then I'm sorry, Cheryl, could you just repeat what that second question was?
Just a basic understanding of what the common misunderstandings are about how bills move through a committee before going to the full vote.
Uh, Common misconceptions. So I think a common misconception that people might have is that if a lot of people get up and oppose a bill, very often I would say that if a bill is on an agenda, you should very much anticipate it's going through. It is unusual that a bill would get posted to a committee agenda and then not go through. Lawmakers will sometimes will say when they vote that they have reservations, and maybe parts of the language are concerning, or people get up there and testify and they illuminate pieces of the bill that maybe lawmakers now have reservations about, but they usually say that they reserve the right to change their vote on the floor, but they're going to vote it out of committee. So I always tell advocates and just in general, if it's made it onto an agenda, it means there's a lot of legislative support for it. It doesn't mean it's going to make it to the governor's desk, but I think you should fully anticipate that bill is going to get through.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Now, I have a question. It's so similar. I mean, I follow a few bills on my own, and in that there was, there are bills that would just rapidly go through the assembly, but just get stuck on the Senate side, for whatever reason. And I'm sure you've dealt with that, whether it's moved on the Senate and not the assembly. So your advice because what we're doing here, we're looking to prepare ourselves to be able to testify. So, we've got all of this great training. We're looking at bills. We're going to decide as a committee which bill we want to support, because we do have to vote as a committee, what bill we're going to support. And we focus on human trafficking. We've mentioned that, mental health, food insecurity, health equity. So, and we are mandated to focus on areas, focusing on women and children, and there are subsections to that. And so we would decide as a committee what bill we want to then support, and we'll go through our process to be able to do that. Once we've decided that we're supporting a bill, we're going to want to go to the State House and testify in front of a committee. And we've done all of this work, and it's moving on the Assembly side, and we just can't make way on the Senate. I guess the question, the answer would be, as you've talked about, working with legislators that maybe you've developed relationships with, and maybe they can, perhaps make an introduction to the chair of the committee, or, and unless we forget the staffers. Sarah always talks to us, until we're all blue in the face about making sure that we pay attention to staffers, and that they are really the lifeline to that legislator. So I guess my question after all of this is to say, in that scenario, how are it's moving on one side, not the other. What do we do?
Yeah, so that is a fairly common situation. I think it requires a bit of detective work, right? So why is one house on board with moving it full steam ahead and the other seemingly wants nothing to do with it? So the first step I would try is to go back to, if you said it's maybe not moving in the Senate, but is having a lot of success on the Assembly side, going back to the Assembly sponsor and trying to find out, well, first of all, that why is the sponsor on the Senate side not doing anything to help move the bill forward? And maybe the Assembly sponsor can maybe shed some light. Maybe they have some intel. Maybe they have an understanding of what the obstacles are. Definitely meet with the Senate sponsor too, to find out if they would be forthcoming about anything they might know about why the bill is stalled. And then definitely, meetings and conversations with the chairperson where the bill is being referred to understand, like, does the chair have a problem with this? Is there something in it that's concerning, or is there some education that you can do to help clarify, or just kind of give them a better understanding of what the bill is trying to achieve? Maybe the language and the actual goal of the bill are not always lined up. That happens a lot, where this is what the sponsor is intending to do, but somehow the language doesn't always maybe match that in real life. So it is a bit of a detective game where you have to kind of go back and circle back with all the players and try to find out what might be holding it up. And it is frustrating.
Yeah. And so just great information. And I think what we try to do with SPAC in terms of the various programming that we do, going to the State House, reaching out to legislators, we're building that relationship. So we're trying to sort of get back to where we were in its heyday when Claire and Janet, some of our seasoned SPAC members, had a lot of impact and influence, in the state. And so, we're trying to get back to that level. And I think, gaining these tools through the training, as well as our visits to the State House, our annual advocacy day, as well as, emailing and exchanging with legislators, inviting them to some of our programs and serving on panels and such. So we're in that process of trying to, reestablish ourselves as one of those organizations like yourself that and that's a lot of work that you've done to be able to work with legislators and develop those relationships, to be an effective advocate, to be able to amplify the voice, as you talked about earlier. And so, I mean, and that's kind of where we are in this sort of work in progress. So, does anyone else have any questions for Sharon? This was fantastic. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't have any questions, but I thought just one kind of balloon to float there for you. One of the things that we're looking at with the anti-trafficking work, and this really comes out of Junior League's 100-year conversation over the foster care system, because you work with DCF, and that's particularly concerning, with people with disabilities. But the discussion that's happening now regarding AI, regarding online safety specifically for kids, but in the case of people with disabilities, for all ages, is becoming front and center and unavoidable. And although you talk about kids and you talk about the damage it's done to elderly people who have been taken advantage of, I don't hear it being discussed as to what tremendous targets people with disabilities online are, and the victimization that ensues as a result of that. We talk about sextortion with kids, and we talk about elder care people being defrauded, but it's already happening, and it's very much happening within our disability communities as well. So if that could be on your radar,
no, it absolutely,
that would be very important, because the feds have clearly walked away from this, and so we're going to have to deal with it at the state level. And our new governor was supportive of many of these kinds of bills at the federal level, and has said she would like to see New Jersey take action on them at the state level. So we're going to try to hold her to that.
absolutely. And I think that's a great point. I mean, we do right now offer internet safety for people with disabilities. We've had a number of webinars and things along that line, but it is really a challenge. If you have a cognitive disability, it's sometimes hard to understand when information that's being provided to you might not be on the up and up, right? That someone is trying to take advantage of you to scam you out of money, or to put you in a dangerous situation physically or sexually, or just make you a victim of something, because you don't necessarily understand that information that's being fed to you through the screen is actually inaccurate and false and manipulative. And so that is a real challenge for the people that we represent, who have access to computers and the internet, and and sometimes credit cards and other things. It is something that we continuously try to educate people on, but we have seen that go down bad paths. And so certainly it's something on our radar, but maybe it should be higher on our radar, as you've talked about. It's certainly something I can bring back on my end.
We would love it.
Yes. Yeah, that's a hard one.
It's a hard one, but it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger by the day.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And it affects people with disabilities, because if you're defrauded and you're somebody with disabilities, it can affect your benefits.
Yes.
And you could get derailed and become homeless, or lose your health care, or all sorts of other stuff. And how can you say, well, I was a victim of a crime, when you can't even articulate?
Yes.
It's very complicated.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and end tonight. Normally, we stay on for a bit of a debrief, but we're just about at time. So again, Sharon, thank you so very much for
amazing. Thank you so much.
really
And
interesting
thank you for your
information.
work.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Lots of great content. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank you.
work that you all do. And I hope we continue to, feel free to reach out, stay in contact.
And you will be at the State House on the 23rd?
Of March. That's a
March.
Monday, right?
That's a Monday.
If I don't have to be in Washington that day, then we have a Hill Day also. I noticed on your website you guys do a Hill Day, right? You have a walk to Washington. And so we're still in the process of figuring out hours, but if it's not on the 23rd, then I will be in Trenton and I will look for you guys for sure.
Fantastic.
All right. You have a good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.